Welcome to the last session of week 2. Following last week's session of the Korean imperial emblem, we will now look at how Korean court visual symbolisms and imagery changed after annexation under Japanese colonial rule. Let's focus on royal portraits, palace grounds, the national flag, and the imperial emblem. Japanese intent and ability to fully annex Korea became evident when pro-Japanese collaborators in office successfully signed the 1905 Ulsa Treaty. Several nationalist officials resigned and even committed suicide, which also sparked similar suicides and protests among the general public. Gojong's position and authority as emperor gradually weakened and became almost minimal. After the dispatchment of the Hague Special Envoy in an attempt to seek foreign support and intervention to preserve Korean sovereignty, he was forced to abdicate the throne to his son, Sunjong. Sunjong, lacking political power and measures to counter Japanese control over the government, became a superficial state head, while Gojong was forced to live in retirement in Gyeongbokgung Palace. Sunjong and Gojong's portraits were often used in commemorative postcards that celebrated the abdication and annexation as peaceful and mutually beneficial events. In particular, Sunjong's image was controlled by the colonial government, and he was often depicted as a weak and inferior leader. The portrait images of the Yi royal family were also produced in the form of family portraits. The production of these family portraits and their wide circulation in the colonial period demystified the Korean royal family and made them readily accessible. It also made it easier for the Japanese government to assimilate the Yi lineage to the Japanese imperial family and consolidate the subordinate position of the Korean royal family to the Japanese emperor. Improved printing technology and facilities in Korea enabled mass dissemination of these images, and so the Yi family became popularized and commodified. Interestingly, the Korean public held on to the allegiance to Gojong even after annexation, and his portrait became a popular collectible. His image was often associated with the desire to restore Korean sovereignty and independence, and was used to instill nationalistic sentiments by independence activists. His sudden death in 1919, which was rumored to be a poisoning, even instigated the well-known March 1st movement, a nationwide protest against Japanese colonial rule. One of the most conspicuous changes after annexation was the gradual alteration, demolition, and selling off of palace buildings and gates. For instance, the Japanese colonial government constructed a massive government general building in front of the Gyeongbokgung Palace. This was a symbolic move, as Gyeongbokgung Palace symbolized the authority of the Korean monarch, and blocking the palace expressed Japanese control and dominance in Korea. In addition to palace grounds, the Japanese government also demolished Hwangodan Altar for the construction of the Joseon Railway Hotel to accommodate guests for the 1915 Joseon Industrial Exhibition. This was also a deliberate decision made to belittle the authority and legacy of the Korean Empire. Today, the only remaining structure is Hwanggungu, a smaller shrine used to enshrine ancestral plaques, while the main gate to the grounds was only restored in 2009. Many palace buildings and gates were demolished to make room for new developments or sold off for revenue. Most famously, Changgyeonggung Palace was transformed into a public park that attracted huge crowds who sought entertainment within palace grounds. In order to attract larger crowds, while also undermining the legacy of the Yi royal family, the government general also built a zoo and a botanical garden. The government general also planted hundreds of cherry blossom trees inside the palace and assimilated the traditional Korean palace into the aesthetics of the Japanese Empire. Although most visitors to the park were Japanese in the beginning, more and more Koreans also became visitors, and they quickly surpassed Japanese tourists in number. Images like these further promoted and publicized palace grounds and enticed members of the public to pay a visit. The advent of photography and print media in Korea promoted the consumption of the Korean court as a commodity. In addition to Changgyeonggung Palace grounds, images of private and exclusive spaces, such as the main hall of Gyeongbokgung Palace, became accessible through photography and reproduced images. Although the publicization of the palace did undermine the legacy of the Yi lineage, it was in many ways an effective appeasement policy that prevented the risk of another nationwide resistance movement against the Japanese colonial government. Even after annexation, it was not in the best interest of Japan to completely rid of the Korean royal family and the court. In contrast, they served as effective tools to further Japanese interests in assimilating the Korean royal family into the Japanese imperial family, and simultaneously sold Japanese annexation of Korea as a harmonious and mutually beneficial achievement. Although the Yi family was no longer a legitimate ruling power and was reduced to fascination, they helped appease hostile public sentiments against Japanese occupation, particularly in the early colonial period. While Japan was happy to preserve the superficial dignity of the court and royal family, it quickly took control over how they were presented within and without the court. The creation of ogi, the king's flag, was one example of Japanese manipulation of Korean symbols. The king's flag during Emperor Gojong's reign consisted of the yin-yang taeguk symbol, accompanied by 8 trigrams. During Emperor Sunjong's reign, Japanese authorities, led by Resident General Ito Hirobumi, initiated a nationwide tour for the new emperor. The tour was designed to appease public sentiments by putting forth to Koreans their own beloved monarch, but also publicizing and consolidating the official yet controversial abdication of the throne from Gojong to Sunjong. In order to visually differentiate Sunjong's reign from his father's, the new ogi was designed and carried throughout the tour. This new ogi was a simple design of an Iwamun in the center. Although the Iwamun had previously symbolized the ambition to be seen as a strong and competitive empire, from the 1910s, it quickly became a symbol of a powerless and commodified Korean royal family and court. Objects typically used in court were also mass-produced and commodified toward and after annexation. As we mentioned in the last session, various crafts such as lacquered boxes, plates, glasses, cutlery, kettles, and vases adorned with the Iwamun were mass-produced and sold to the public. Many of these customers were Japanese, but Koreans who admired or were fascinated by the Yi royal family also purchased these items. The sales of these craftworks not only collected revenue, but also pervasively impacted the way in which the Korean monarchy was perceived. Although legal authority had already been forfeited, the family and the Korean court became decorative and powerless, even symbolically. In the colonial period, private companies began to use the Iwamun. For instance, Hwapyeongdang Pharmacy used the Iwamun motif as their company logo in newspaper advertisements and appealed to Korean customers who would have associated the emblem with high-quality goods fit for the royal family. Moreover, as Japanese goods flooded the Korean market toward 1910, the use of the Korean imperial emblem was a way of marketing the company as a local or domestic company rather than a foreign company, tugging at the hearts of patriotic consumers. The dominance of the Iwamun in visually representing the court and royal family corresponded to the increased restriction on the use of the taegukgi flag toward annexation. While the imperial emblem could be separated from Korean political autonomy and independence, the national flag was a complete embodiment of it. Therefore, the taegukgi was prohibited from being used after annexation, with few exceptions where it was permitted to be used to decorate buildings or for explicitly commercial use. After the 1919 March 1st movement, the Korean national flag was seen as signs of defiance and resistance against the colonial regime and was strictly regulated in use. Ironically, this prohibition on the political usage of the taegukgi cemented the flag as a symbol of the Korean desire for the recovery of independence and the determination of independence activists. The integrity of the taegukgi was thus preserved throughout the colonial period as it became a symbol of resistant nationalism, and it continued to serve as a national flag after independence in 1945. Week 2 focused on the arts and culture of the Korean Empire. So far, we've explored the historical context of the proclamation of the Korean Empire, elevated visual codes of the court, and the construction of an imperial capital city, and the Iwamun emblem. In this session, we've discussed the various changes that were made to the Korean court and the image of the Yi royal family under colonial rule. For next week, let's move on to fine arts produced in Korea at the turn of the 20th century, specifically at traditional ink painting. See you next week.